In the summer of 1997, my family and I took a 4-week cross-country trip in our very little 90s-style Rockwood camper. It was complete with the wooden side panel, didn't have any air conditioning at all as we went across the country from mid-June to mid-July, arguably some of the hottest weather of the year. But we started going up northwest, up to South Dakota, then over to Seattle, down through northeastern California, and then back east through the middle of the country, Four Corners, Colorado. It was really an amazing trip. But the beginning of it was interesting. We made it to South Dakota within the first few days, and I realized in those days that I loved staying at campgrounds that had a swimming pool. I was 10, of course, so I thought, this is great. If we stay at campgrounds that have swimming pools, this is just going to be an awesome trip. Forget the things that we're going to see, right? Swimming pools at every campground is awesome. Well, on the way to Badlands National Park, I discovered that we were staying in the park and that the park did not have a swimming pool. Badlands National Park does not have a swimming pool, for anyone that was wondering. Of course it didn't, and I was devastated, and it was very hot. We'd been in the car for a long time. I was complaining about no pool. My sister was probably yelling at me about me whining about no pool, and my parents were probably ready to drive back home at that point because the first week this was already happening, right? So the noise just grew louder and louder in the car until we turned a corner and saw this. And suddenly, the car grew silent. We were in awe. And all of us just went, wow. Wow. And my mom said, well, this just made the trip. I'm good. We can go home now. And it really was a highlight of the trip. My parents have told that story many times. I don't know if I remember it or if I just remember them telling the story, but the Badlands was really one of the most beautiful places that I had been to in my life up to that point. And I realized some things are better than a swimming pool. Sometimes we experience transformation in a place where we least expect to find it. I wonder, I'm sure you have, ever gone to a place expecting to have some horrible experience, doing something you don't want to do, but then it changes you, it transforms you, it ends up being a good thing that happened in your life, and you're pleasantly surprised. Well, today we're coming back to the book of Acts. We were in Acts last week, but we come back to it in this series. And if you haven't read much of Acts before, it really is a very thrilling book, I think. It documents the beginning of the church and the Holy Spirit moving through people as the gospel is spread to the ends of the earth as Jesus directed them in the very beginning of the book as he ascends to heaven. And it is an exciting book because crazy things happen and miraculous things happen and thousands of people come to know Jesus. And Paul is someone who's talked about a lot in the book. He has a very exciting story about coming to know Jesus and then planting churches all over the place. And if you continue reading beyond Acts in the New Testament, you'll find many letters written by Paul to some of the churches that he planted and some of the first churches throughout this whole movement. And Paul had several what we've called now missionary journeys. And on his second one, he met Lydia. So the story that you heard from Cindy was from his second journey. He had several of them, but he's traveling in this one with at least Silas and Timothy at this point, so he's not alone. And his first journey was pretty contained to just the ancient Near East. So as you see on this map, over to the right, where some of the yellow is, that's his first journey. But then for this one, he tried to go towards Asia. So if you follow the purple line, you'll see that he didn't really make it too far into Asia. They went from town to town, but the Holy Spirit kept stopping them from going into Asia. So they ended up in the port town of Troas, which you see by the yellow arrow that's pointing to it over there. And there, you heard from our reading, Paul hears God say, it's time to bring the gospel to Macedonia. He actually sees a man from Macedonia in a vision, in a dream, telling him to come and to help them. So that's his clue that God is calling them to go. So Troas is strategically located into a thoroughfare. So once they leave from there, they are deliberately launching the gospel into Europe, where they had never been before. And they make it all the way to Philippi, which you can see by the black arrow that's on the map. And you may have heard of Philippi from the letters that Paul writes to the Philippians. It's the same place. But whenever Paul would go into a new place, he would strategically go to the synagogue on the Sabbath. But Philippi didn't have a synagogue. So they went to the river and hoped to find a prayer gathering, and they did. I love what one pastor said. He said they found a makeshift riverside synagogue. It's this mix of women who were there, both Gentiles and Jews, and Lydia, our face of faith today, was among them. Now, to understand Lydia and the people around her, it's important to understand Philippi. Augustus set up the town of Philippi as a place to retire all of his army. So after serving in the military and all of his battles after a big civil war in Rome, Augustus set up Philippi to be a retired army community. So it was a place of great wealth and privilege and prestige. It attracted a lot of different merchants to serve these wealthy retired people, and Lydia was one of those merchants, as you heard Miss Allie talk about a little bit. Lydia really is a fascinating person. While she has some sort of faith because she's at this prayer gathering, she's not Jewish, and she's actually not even from Philippi or Macedonia. She's from Thyatira, which is actually a province in Asia. Do y'all remember that Paul was going to go to Asia, but kept being told no, and here he finds someone from that area? But it's a town known for its trade guilds. So Lydia sold purple cloth, which was for wealthy people. To create the cloth, you had to crush certain shells together in order to create that color, and it was a great expense to turn wool into purple cloth. So we know that she's very successful in business, knowing from where she's from and what she sells, which means that she's also pretty wealthy. And she was the head of her household. There was no man to speak of, which is absolutely unheard of at that time as well. So here are these men speaking to the women in this makeshift riverside synagogue, and they share about Jesus to them, about his life, death, and resurrection, and Lydia's heart, sitting there listening, is moved. She says right away, God opens her heart, and she immediately knows that she has to get in on what they're doing. She says that right away. I want to be a part of this. I want to be a part of what God is doing in your lives. And so her entire household, not just her, is baptized on the spot. She's getting her whole family and her whole house into what Paul is doing and the others are doing. And here's what I love. I don't know if you caught this tiny part, but after she was baptized, Luke, who is the author of Acts, writes this. He says, "She urged us, 'If you have judged me to be faithful to the Lord, come stay at my home.'" That word urged is very important here. This was originally written in Greek, so the Greek word for urged is parakaleo, which means call to one side for an earnest, purposeful exchange. Usually when we hear urge, we hear that earnest, right? Urging somebody to do something, but it's not always very purposeful, but it was in this case. Lydia herself is the epitome of hospitality. Some of you know Janie's place out here. Some of you knew Janie Gardner, who the place was named after. If you know her, Lydia was the Janie Gardner of her time, right? But it's not just about hospitality for her. The gospel compelled her so much that she wanted to be a part of what they were doing, and she persisted until they agreed to come into her house and bless her house as a hub of faith. She didn't want to just care for them. She wanted to be partners in ministry through her own home. Last week, we talked about the Ethiopian eunuch being the first African Christian. Well, Lydia became known as the first Christian in Europe. Her home became the first church in Philippi and in Europe. So in this story, I think we see the growth of the church is really a team effort that depends on both hospitality and generosity. The growth of the church is a team effort that depends on hospitality and generosity. And it's just as true today as it was back then. So I want to unpack this just a little bit for us. Many of you know that my dad is a retired pastor. Growing up as a pastor's kid meant that a lot of eyes were on me. Did y'all know that? When you're a pastor's kid, everyone's looking at you and seeing what you're doing. I don't think my sons have realized that yet. You all are really good at giving them their own space. But I wasn't the stereotypical pastor's kid. You know, a lot of people think that pastor's kids are the rebels, right, that act out and do the crazy things. I was a really good kid. But I understand now that how I looked mattered. Did any of you grow up with parents who were in the public eye, who were known? No one else. People knew who you were, who your family was, right? And so how you looked, maybe you had you were in your own position of power. How you look matters, right? How you dress, how you present yourself, how you act in front of others matters. And sometimes, fairly or unfairly, you represent your family by how you look. So as a businesswoman who is the head of her household, Lydia has a lot of people looking at her. And at some point today, not right now, but at some point today, I invite you to go back to Acts 16 and to read the whole chapter because it's a very exciting chapter. It includes a possessed woman that they run into, and then Paul and Silas are wrongfully charged with disturbing the city. They're beaten up and flogged and thrown into prison. But then the exciting part of the chapter is that there's a crazy jailbreak. And after all of that, where do they go? They go back to Lydia's house. She takes them in. They know that they can trust her and be welcomed by her. And because of that, I don't think Lydia seems to care about appearances. She doesn't ask, what is it going to look like for me to take in these Jewish men who just broke out of jail? She doesn't care about that. She is part of a team, and the growth of the church depended on her hospitality. She's unselfish, doing things only for the benefit of others and not expecting anything in return. The growth of the church depended on her hospitality. Every ministry, every church needs people like Lydia. The people like Lydia are the ones that are often in the background, not doing anything for any kind of notice or applause, but playing a pivotal part. And there are so many Lydias here in this church. There are a few people who come in the cooler parts of the day to take care of all of the plant beds around our church, weeding them and making them look nice. There are other Lydias who mow the lawn and the great green space that we have out here. There's been a lot of tree branches that have fallen down, and we have Lydias who have taken care of those branches and chopped them up and gotten them out of the way so that our space looks nice. Both of these teams work quietly. They do things on their own schedules to make our church look welcoming and cared for. And there's even Lydias that make up a little facilities team that go around our church throughout the summer. They have a long list of things they're trying to do to fix and to replace and to make it better. And they just work quietly behind the scenes, getting things that need to happen. There's two Lydias who come here to this space on Saturdays and set up these chairs. Did you know that those are done by volunteers? Two people who signed up the most, they asked for a key, so we gave it to them because they were the ones who were doing it the most. Another Lydia comes in here early on Sunday morning to set the coffee that we all enjoy, most of us who like coffee enjoy. There are a few other helpers who get out all the treats and the snacks as well. There are some Lydias that are in the back right now making sure that I can be heard. They're streaming the service online. They're putting things up on the screen so that we can be a part of worship. Other Lydias will stay after this service and clean up after all of us. the job that nobody else wants, but they do it. All of them are quiet, not boastful or resentful, just serving in a church that they love. And all of them play a part in making our church a welcoming space for others. Are you a Lydia that could join them in that? Every ministry, every church needs a Lydia. Where might God be calling you to be a Lydia? The growth of the church is a team effort. It depends on hospitality, but it also depends on generosity. And so I invite you to stay with me just a little bit longer for this last bit that I think is too important for us to miss. Lydia and Paul were very different from one another. They are this unlikely pair to be attracted to one another for ministry, right? That Lydia was so captivated by Paul's story that she wanted to be a part of it. Lydia was a Gentile and Paul was a Jew. Back then, social classes didn't mix. Lydia was female, Paul was male, and that mattered back then too. However, they both had this open heart and decided to see one another. Paul baptized her entire family, and I think both of them left the water of that makeshift synagogue changed and transformed. As I already mentioned, her home became the first Christian church, not just in Philippi, but in Europe. And if you continue on through the New Testament, you'll come to Paul's letter to this church in Philippi. And in it, he talks about their generosity, about their inclusion, about their spiritual maturity, and the ways that they are leaders in the gospel. And if you read some of the other letters to the other churches that Paul writes and compare them to this one, you realize that the church in Philippi is a really good church. Paul will yell to a lot of the other churches about how they're doing things wrong, but in Philippi, it's a totally different tone. It's very encouraging. He starts by talking to them about how he gives thanks to God in remembrance for all of them, praying with joy for their partnerships in the gospel from the very first day until now. And that first day was at the river and then in Lydia's home. People could have looked at Paul and Lydia back then and wondered why they became a team together, but instead of focusing on their differences, they leaned in and they showed up for one another. And in doing so, they really practiced generosity. I think now in our churches, the greater church, not our individual church, but the greater church, we struggle with focusing too much on differences. As the separation between political parties and ideologies just grows wider, so do those in our church who can claim those parties. And if the two mix together, we wonder why, and we wonder how. Why are you with this person, or why are you with that person? Because they believe that, or follow this, or follow that, right? But Paul and Lydia learned how to lean in and to show up for one another, even in their differences. And sometimes I wonder, I fear that we've lost that ability. Instead of leaning in, instead of listening and showing up, I think we like to wait for that pause that could allow us to lob our best soundbite or best article that will just prove our point, right? To attack someone else. But what if there's another choice for us? What if we allowed God to open our hearts? In the same way that God opened Lydia's heart that first day when she heard the gospel, what if we allowed God to open our hearts to generosity, not hiding behind the fear of scarcity or not having enough, or not hiding behind the fear of others who are different, not hiding behind our screens that can protect us but really make us just feel awful in the end. You see, sometimes I think we're like that 10-year-old Rachel who only wants to vacation in places with a swimming pool. She looks at what isn't there instead of what is. We can focus so much on the negative when we miss the beauty and the opportunity that's right in front of us. I don't know if you thought of this, but if you think about Paul's journey to this place, crossing the river after he's been given a vision by a man who needed help, right? So they crossed that river looking for this man that was in his dream. And instead of finding that man, they find this group of women. And Paul could have said, well, nope, it's not the man that I saw in my dream. We better turn around now and keep looking for that man. Instead, they stayed. They stayed with that group. And if they wouldn't have, they would have missed this amazing opportunity to change the lives of these women. He opened his heart to those he encountered. Lydia opened her heart in incredible and generous ways to spread the gospel, and it changed everything. So what if we opened our hearts to one another, to see each other, to really listen to each other, to use the resources that God has given us, and to show up for one another? Church, we are doing this. I already talked about the ways that you have shown up this week. But I know, because I've been there, that some of you might be thinking in your minds, I hope they're listening to this. I hope that they will listen to this, listen to Pastor Rachel's words, and open their hearts a little more. On the way home, you might be tempted to say to whoever's riding with you, did you hear about Pastor Rachel opening up your heart? Do you think you should do that? There's no place for that, friends. I'm talking about you and to you. We don't get to play that card because we can't control others. I'm talking to myself too, and I'm talking to you. You open your heart. See where God is in the middle of it all and how God is calling you to open your heart. The growth of the church is a team effort, and it depends on you. Without you, something huge is missing from this place. And so I'm so glad that you're a part of it.